This tutorial is intended for people who are already familiar with Lockdown and just want to see what's new in 1.4. To use Lockdown, it's under Effect, Vranos, Lockdown. You'll also notice Generate Vectors, which is a plugin that builds the motion vectors which Lockdown can track. There's no longer a script panel under Window. We have all the script functions in here. So I'll start by pre-composing just to ensure that my comp is the same frame rate and resolution as the footage. When I select this, Lockdown should be applied. The optional tracker filter honestly isn't really necessary anymore. I probably wouldn't use it unless you were having issues. For point track method, our biggest new update is we have this connected vectors feature. You probably always want to use this extremely accurate mode. It takes way longer to render than the other modes, but it's going to save you so much time in manual tracking, it's really worth it. The next thing to do is press full vector setup. At this point, if you're running Lockdown 1.4 for the first time, it's going to warn you that you're missing the render template for Generate Vectors. Inside of the downloadable folder, you'll see a .aom file. You can load it and then select it for your render output down here. Skip through these two warnings, just remember that you are going to have to interpret your footage after. This has been rendered, it took about 8 minutes. We'll work to make that faster as we go. So if we go back to the composition we were just in, you'll notice that there's an EXR pass here. Just to explain what happened, in case you ever have to do something manually, when you do this full vector setup, it basically duplicates the composition, clears the effects, and then puts on the effect Generate Vectors. It pre-composes it into its own composition, and the vectors are on here. You can't see them, but they're there. If you really want to, you can crank the contrast. And you can see them. And then when it renders, I'm just going to delete this because I don't need it. It uses import and replace. Because the effect is extremely slow, that's why we replace it with the EXR as soon as it's done rendering. Going back to the composition, this won't work just yet. You have to go to your project window, find this EXR, interpret the footage, and choose Preserve RGB. I think in the future we'll be able to automate this. Now here on Lockdown, you'll notice that this EXR pass has already been sourced under the connected vectors, which means you can place points using the new lasso tool, just holding Control, clicking, and dragging. And then when you press to track points. All of the points track extremely quickly because they're just following the EXR data. One pro tip I'll give you, however, is for a shot like this where your character is near the borders, I find it's a really good idea to expand the composition. I'm going to delete all of my points, holding Alt, Control, clicking, and dragging. The lasso tool works for deletion too. And I'm going to cut my Lockdown effect. Then I'm going to make my composition bigger, just by a factor of 1.25. And I'll pre-compose this shot, moving all attributes into the new comp, calling it Wolf Expanded. And then for the vectors, the same basic idea. Vectors expanded. Now I'm going to paste back my instance of Lockdown and source that comp. And I'll just hide this, I don't need to see it. And now I'll place some tracking points again. And if I need the points to be more dense, I'll take this lasso grid pixel distance, and that decides how far away the points are. I'll set this to 25. And trace over the detailed areas on the wolf's face. I'll track these points and play it back. It looks like some of those points drifted off, or were outside of the wolf to begin with. I'll just delete those. And I'll add some expansion points. And turn on Interpolate Partial Tracks. here's the shot, and now we can move on to the lockdown process. I'll triangulate the mesh and clean up some of these strange parts. And I'll apply the mesh on this frame and see how stable it looks. Then I'll press lockdown. Just double checking, here's my background, and here's my stabilized pre-comp. And from here, I'm going to put in my painting texture, which was done in Photoshop. And I'll just solo this. And here's the shot. So of course there's more to be done. There are things that can help, like separating overlapping objects, like this wolf's front leg here. And also expanding a little bit over the borders, where really the main idea is just to paint a little bit more on your texture, which isn't very hard to do. Just for example's sake, I'll go into this composition, I'll take this texture and kind of float it out back behind there. And you'll notice how that expansion would work. You could imagine if you just did that with a little bit of quality. Thanks for watching. For more info, check out AE